This is The World Today, giving you a snapshot of the latest news from around the world. I'm Peninah Karibe. Coming up, U.S. top diplomat Antony Blinken arrives in Kiev as Ukraine-Russia tensions soar. In Tonga, the death toll rises in last week's tsunami as the island nation reels from its aftermath. And the World Health Organization says the pandemic is far from over as it warns against easing vigilance. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken has arrived in Kiev for talks with Ukraine's leaders. Ahead of the trip, the White House press secretary raised the alarm on a potentially imminent Russian attack on Ukraine. This as recent diplomatic efforts failed to defuse the situation on Ukraine's border, where Moscow has amassed tens of thousands of troops. All right, let's now go to Stephanie Freed, who's live for us in Kiev. Stephanie, what more do we know about Blinken's visit?
Well, he's here for diplomacy. He's trying to achieve a peaceful path, is what he said this morning in Kiev, with Russia to avoid any sort of conflict. He's meeting with Ukraine's President Zelensky, with the foreign minister of Ukraine. And again, this is to show the U.S. commitment to Ukraine, U.S. backing of Ukraine, U.S. commitment to Ukraine's territorial integrity, and again, to try and follow a path of diplomacy to diffuse any escalation. This is after talks last week between Russia and the West hit deadlock, didn't move forward, and as you noted, increasing concern as Russia mobilizes troops along the borders of Ukraine and Russia, and also now there's a threat, or looking as if there's a threat also from the north, from Belarus. This is coming 2 days before the Secretary of State's visit, 2 days before in Ukraine, that he is set to meet the foreign minister of Russia, Sergei Lavrov. He's going to meet him in Geneva again to try to follow the path of diplomacy. Peninah?
And we know also Russia is sending troops to Belarus near Ukraine's border for military exercises. What's Ukraine saying about this?
There's a lot of concern about that. There's a lot of concern that the military exercises really are a cover for essentially setting up troops and setting up positions along the Belarus border that also presents an imminent threat to Ukraine. If you look at the distance between Ukraine, let's say Kiev, where we are now, the heart of Ukraine, and Minsk, it's only several hundred kilometers, and the Russian capability with missile launchers, missiles that have the capability of hitting Kiev, the threat is obvious. So that is a concern now. That certainly will come up in Secretary of State Blinken's meetings in the coming days. And again, there's concern in Ukraine about that move and what those moves, or what is being called a military joint exercise, what the implications are there. Peninah.
All right, Stephanie, thank you for that update. Stephanie Freed, live for us in Kiev. Kazakhstan's state of emergency has expired following riots in early January. Kazakh authorities insist order has been restored after weeks of unrest, but say counter-terrorism operations are ongoing. Riots began over widespread outrage of rising fuel prices. 227 people died amid escalating violence. Former Kazakh President Nursultan Nazarbayev made a public appearance on Tuesday, his first since the unrest. The former president addressed claims of a rift in the country's leadership.
The events of January shook all of Kazakhstan. The aim of this organized unrest and attack on Kazakhstan was to destroy our state integrity and our country's founding principles. Those events show once again that independence must be protected like the apple of one's eye, like a delicate vessel to be handled carefully. There is no conflict or confrontation among the country's elite. Such rumors are completely groundless.
Houthi rebels say Saudi-led coalition airstrikes killed at least 20 people, including some in Yemen's capital, Sana'a. It comes after an attack that killed 3 people at an oil facility in Abu Dhabi on Monday. Yemen's Houthi rebels have claimed responsibility for that attack. The UN has expressed concern and condemned the coalition airstrike. UN relief officials said that Tonga has removed a thick coat of ash from an international runway on Wednesday, paving the way for the arrival of urgent emergency aid. The UN officials said Tonga could receive flights from Australia and New Zealand from Thursday. Tonga's government, meanwhile, confirmed 3 people died from an undersea volcano and tsunami that destroyed the Pacific island nation on Saturday. The Prime Minister's office says satellite phones have allowed for some communication, but most places are still cut off. With clean water a concern, the government is advising people to only drink bottled water. Owen Poland has more.
Houses on some of the islands were all destroyed by the tsunami. The exact number of casualties is still being counted. The volcanic ash has contaminated water throughout the country, making drinking water difficult to access. Crops have been devastated. Overall, the country experienced heavy property losses. Volcanic ash is still in the air, which can harm people's respiratory systems. So the government is urging people to avoid going out and wear face masks. The public is complying with the emergency measures, and they are working together to overcome the difficulties. Overall, social order remains in place. After the eruption, the Chinese embassy immediately activated the contingency plan and communicated with relevant departments of the Tongan government. We will spare no efforts to protect the safety of Chinese citizens and other entities in Tonga. There are more than 1,000 Chinese nationals and company employees on Tonga's main island. So far, they are safe, living and working normally. Since communication has been cut off, we asked the Tonga government to help us check out the situation of Chinese citizens on other islands and provide necessary support. Over the past few days, the staff of the Chinese embassy have visited some of the households of Chinese citizens that were seriously affected by the disaster and provided help.
The Chinese ambassador to Tonga says there are no reports of casualties among Chinese citizens. Cao Xiaolin spoke with China Media Group via satellite phone.
Houses on some of the islands were all destroyed by the tsunami. The exact number of casualties is still being counted. The volcanic ash has contaminated water throughout the country, making drinking water difficult to access. Crops have been devastated. Overall, the country experienced heavy property losses. Volcanic ash is still in the air, which can harm people's respiratory systems. So the government is urging people to avoid going out and wear face masks. The public is complying with the emergency measures, and they are working together to overcome the difficulties. Overall, social order remains in place. After the eruption, the Chinese embassy immediately activated the contingency plan and communicated with relevant departments of the Tongan government. We will spare no efforts to protect the safety of Chinese citizens and other entities in Tonga. There are more than 1,000 Chinese nationals and company employees on Tonga's main island. So far, they are safe, living and working normally. Since communication has been cut off, we asked the Tonga government to help us check out the situation of Chinese citizens on other islands and provide necessary support. Over the past few days, the staff of the Chinese embassy have visited some of the households of Chinese citizens that were seriously affected by the disaster and provided help.
The impact of the tsunami has been felt across the Pacific. In Peru, cleanup is underway after strong waves rocked a ship and caused an oil spill. The Peruvian government said this week that a ship was loading oil into a refinery when it was moved by the waves. At least 2 kilometers of the country's central coast are affected, along with 18,000 square meters of beach. Carcasses of birds, fish and other species have washed ashore. Authorities say the spill is under control. An investigation is ongoing. Let's now get a bigger picture of Tonga and the underwater volcano off its coast. Tonga is a Polynesian archipelago made up of 176 islands southeast of Fiji. The country holds a population of 100,000, residing on 36 of its islands. Tonga withdrew from the British Protectorate and joined the Commonwealth in 1970. The Hunga Tonga Hunga Hapai is an underwater volcano situated about 30 kilometers southwest of Tonga's Fonofu Island. Scientists say it has been active over the past few decades. Its eruptions in 2009 and 2015 created two new land masses. The most recent volcanic flare-up began in December last year with gas, steam and ash plumes rising about 12 kilometers into the air. Its eruption on January 14th was followed by another massive blast the next day, which triggered tsunami waves across the Pacific. The World Health Organization chief says the COVID-19 pandemic is far from over. Director General Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus says 18 million new cases were reported last week. He warns new mutations are likely as Omicron spreads, cautioning against the narrative that the variant is mild. The Director General says Omicron continues to sweep the world.
Omicron may be less severe, on average, of course, but the narrative that it is mild disease is misleading, hurts the overall response, and costs more lives. Make no mistake, Omicron is causing hospitalizations and deaths, and even the less severe cases are inundating health facilities.
And that's it for this edition of The World Today. I'll be back shortly with more news from across Africa on Africa Live. Thanks for watching.
So this is it. I'm just about to be shot.
The little tents here, bottles are being thrown as they do so.
There are about 3 critical bridges here in Marawi. That's one of them. We're going to cross that bridge.
As you can see behind me, police forces
Who are replying with gas. Gas just came in.
Gas, so it's all begun now.
Divisions leading the charge into West Mosul have brought us here.
Just got to be careful here with some gunshots.
This is where most of the fighting has been concentrated.
is the front line now after 9 days of fighting.
We're about 2 to 3 kilometers from within the front clear line.
View of this front line position.
This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Chad has released 22 rebels and political dissidents following an amnesty law. The WHO says the COVID-19 pandemic is far from over as it warns against easing vigilance. And schools reopen in Zamfara state in Nigeria after 4 months of closure due to spate of kidnappings. This is Africa Live. Hello and thank you for joining us. I'm Peninah Karibe. Also coming up, crude oil prices soar to the highest in 7 years. And in sports, Senegalese fans celebrate round of 16 qualification despite draw. Chad has released 22 rebels and political dissidents following an amnesty law passed in November last year. Jailed for treason, the prisoners were freed as a precondition to a national dialogue scheduled for February 15th. CGTN's Wanja Mungai has the story.
It's freedom at last for the 22 inmates held at Klezoum prison near the capital, Jamena. They're among the nearly 300 convicted detainees granted amnesty by President Mahamat Idris Deby Itno in November last year. Their release came as a demand from opposition parties invited to join a roundtable for national dialogue.
Prior to the inclusive national dialogue that is currently in preparation, and in order to allow all the sons and daughters of Chad to participate, the country's highest authority have decided to grant amnesty to compatriots for offences against the integrity of the state for the offences of opinion.
In addition to those convicted for rebellion, presidents of the courts of appeal have been instructed to release detainees who served long-term jails without trial. The 22 released prisoners, however, decry that some of their peers are still behind bars.
Only 22 of us have been released. Others are still inside, and that worries us. We don't know if the Transitional Military Council will be able to release them in the next few days. That's our concern at the moment.
The Justice Minister maintains that all inmates deserving amnesty at Klezoum prison have been released and suspects others have escaped.
Of the 44 detainees concerned by the Law 7, 22 have been identified as being present at the Klezoum prison and correctional facility. Consequently, they will benefit from the effects of this law. 44 divided by 2 makes 22. It means that 22 are not present today.
Despite the controversy surrounding the release of inmates, the upcoming national dialogue in mid-February is hoped to forge a way forward for peace and stability in Chad. Wanja Mungai, CGTN.
We're now joined by Tembisa Fakude, Senior Research Fellow at Africa-Asia Dialogues from Johannesburg for more insights on this. Tembisa, as other countries use firepower to deal with insecurity in the Sahel region, Chad is going for dialogue. Is this the way to go?
Well, it's the way to go, but I don't think we should be too excited about what's going on in Chad. We know that it's still led by someone who is not democratically elected, that is Mohamed Deby, who took over after his father, Idris Deby, was killed in the front lines fighting the rebels. So I think it would be premature for us to be celebrating or embracing a new position that Chad is taking a different path to most of the African countries that are currently engaging with the rebels within their borders.
There is also the issue of foreign troops in the Sahel, with France scaling back, yet security continues to be a concern. We know 4 French soldiers were injured in Burkina Faso. How does the region move forward in securing the area?
Well, France has been a problem in many countries in the Sahel. But also you have currently the United Nations Peacekeeping Force, and the Chadian forces makes up a substantial number of those forces. So they are involved in Burkina Faso, for example. So there's still that cross-border national forces engaged in the so-called peacekeeping missions in the region. And I think until we find some sort of, or a semblance of peace within the nations of the Sahel, particularly in Mali, because Mali has become the new platform at which all of these insurgents are forming and organizing. So until we have peace in those nations in Sahel, I'm one of those skeptics who doubt that we'll ever achieve an overall peace in that region.
All right, Simbisa Fakude live for us in Johannesburg. Thank you for joining us. The World Health Organization chief says the COVID-19 pandemic is far from over. Director General Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus says 18 million new cases were reported last week. He warns new mutations are likely as Omicron spreads, cautioning against the narrative that the variant is mild. The Director General says Omicron continues to sweep the world.
Omicron may be less severe, on average, of course, but the narrative that it is mild disease is misleading, hurts the overall response, and costs more lives. Make no mistake, Omicron is causing hospitalizations and deaths, and even the less severe cases are inundating health facilities.
Meanwhile, the World Health Organization on Friday recommended 2 new drugs for COVID-19, providing yet more options for treating the disease. Wokista Nyabwa reports.
As of 13th January 2022, 36 out of 194 WHO member states had vaccinated less than 10% of their population against COVID-19. 88 other countries had made more progress, but their vaccinated populations still fell under the 40% mark. And as the Omicron variant of COVID-19 continues to spread, the World Health Organization is calling attention to the need to scale up COVID-19 vaccination rates.
In some countries, cases seem to have peaked, which gives hope that the worst of this latest wave is done with, but no country is out of the woods yet. Make no mistake, Omicron is causing hospitalizations and deaths, and even the less severe cases are inundating health facilities.
The World Health Body continues to warn against easing measures taken to protect the public, saying the battle is not yet won.
Across all of the vaccines, high levels of protection against severe disease. That's the outcome we're most interested in, protection against death. Against Omicron, many of the vaccines have shown a reduction in efficacy against infection. And that's why we see a lot of breakthrough infections, but these are mostly not resulting in severe disease.
The WHO recommended 2 new drugs, providing yet more options for treating the disease, sharing new information on the breakthrough science and increasing access to drugs, scientists note, is vital in the fight against the disease.
This is a dangerous virus, but there is hope out there because we can reduce severe disease and death significantly with earlier clinical care, with vaccines that are reaching those who are most at risk around the world. This won't be the last variant of concern. So now is the time to support and invest in the surveillance system.
Scientists and policymakers are working with leaders and healthcare workers across the world toward achieving the target of vaccinating 70% of populations by July 2022. Wokista Nyabwa, CGTN.
Guinea's former President Alpha Condé has left the country after being deposed in a military coup in 2021, according to 2 officials. A local news website reported that the ex-president had boarded a plane to the United Arab Emirates. There's, however, been no government declaration about Condé leaving the country. A high-ranking official at the Foreign Ministry who requested anonymity, however, said Condé had left Guinea. An official on duty at the airport in the capital, Conakry, who also requested anonymity, said Condé had left on a private plane. Now, Somalia's government spokesperson Mohamed Ibrahim Mwalimu, who was wounded in an Al-Shabaab suicide attack on Sunday, has been airlifted to Turkey for further medical attention. Here's Mohamed Kahir with more details from Mogadishu.
The spokesman of Somali government, Mohamed Ibrahim Mwalimu, who was wounded in a terror attack on Sunday, has been airlifted to Turkey for more treatment. Government officials said Mwalimu's injuries are not life-threatening, as reported by some media, but need special care.
We want to appreciate the Prime Minister Mohamed Hussein Roble for his role in directing relevant agencies in providing urgent medical help for the spokesman, Mohamed Ibrahim Mwalimu, following the attack.
Somali Prime Minister visited the injured spokesman in hospital on Sunday following the attack. Mohamed Ibrahim Mwalimu will join the director of the national television, who was wounded in a similar attack on November, in which the director of the radio, Abdulaziz Gulaid, lost his life. The militant group Al-Shabaab claimed the responsibility for both suicide attacks that targeted the veteran journalists. The group, which threatened to disrupt the ongoing polls in the country, has increased its hit-and-run attacks. The security agencies have been directed to keep the country safe, while the citizens have been urged to be extra vigilant during this transitional period. Mohamed Kahiye, CGTN, Mogadishu, Somalia.
You're watching Africa Live. Let's take a short break. We'll be right back with more news.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Nigeria is my home. 160 million vibrant, ambitious individuals constantly seeking the perfect self-expression. It is these people who inspired me to be that person that is seen, to be a voice that is heard, and ultimately to be the anchor that I am. I have to tap in, tune in, and turn on the very best qualities within me to deliver the news. I'm Richard Nta, an anchor for CGTN.
Let's head to Sierra Leone, which marked on Tuesday the 20th anniversary of the West African state's brutal civil war. Former child soldiers who were conscripted into the war have been turning around their lives, as CGTN's Joy Kiruki Juma reports.
Ibrahim Jabati is determined to take charge of his life. A former child soldier, Jabati looks back at the civil war that broke out in Sierra Leone and the impact it had on him.
The revolution in Sierra Leone at the time, I was a little boy. I was 15 years old. When the war came, the rebels attacked my hometown and I was captured. It was midday. It was actually the first time that I saw someone get killed, just in front of me. He was an old man that lived in the same town as me. They used a bayonet and shot until one of them picked up an axe and hit the old man's head. Since that day, they took me and gave me a weapon.
The conflict that broke out in 1991 saw Liberian rebels support efforts to overthrow the government. Ishmael Charles, another former child soldier who was conscripted at the age of 9, says they had no choice at the time.
You can't outrightly also say, "Sir or ma, I'm not interested." I mean, that you'll be committing a suicide, because the SBU units had very rugged commanders, and so they give young boys drugs so that they fly out of their senses. And so when they actually give instructions, you don't follow those instructions, then you're actually into very big trouble for yourself. So we cooperated. We saw lots of different crazy things that the rebel commanders were doing, and they were very excited for young boys who will exhibit, so much senselessness by killing people.
The conflict left tens of thousands of people dead. On January 18, 2002, former President Ahmed Tijan Kabar declared an end to the war.
Actually, I thank God because I have a family now with 4 children. My first son is now in grade 5. God has not made it possible for me to achieve what I expected, but thank God, I have been able to build a 3-bedroom flat in my village, and I'm still trying.
That's how I was able to go back to school and choose to read peace and conflict studies, and then read some aspects of humanitarian work and started off my career as a humanitarian worker in 2005.
According to Charles, memories of the war still haunt him, adding that problems that contributed to the conflict are still prevalent.
The social exclusion is still a reality. The marginality and the feeling of exclusion of young people is still a reality. The poverty is still very high. Nepotism is still there. And so when all those glaring realities are huge, and corruption being the order of the day, makes it obvious that we should still be worried.
The hope for many Sierra Leoneans is that they will not repeat the mistakes of the past. Joy Kiruki Juma, CGTN.
Let's revisit our story on Guinea, where former President Alpha Condé has left the country after being deposed in a military coup in 2021, according to 2 officials. A local news website reported that the ex-president had boarded a plane to the United Arab Emirates. For more on this, we have Wole Ojawale, the Regional Organized Crime Observatory Coordinator for Central Africa at the Institute for Security Studies. He joins us now from Dakar. Thank you very much, Mr. Wole, for joining us. So, well, we have heard much about efforts to stabilize Mali. Where do we stand in Guinea?
Thank you so much. I think a lot of things have happened since September when the coup took place in Guinea. And then what is important now is that the transition committee is working hand in hand and making proposal to ECOWAS to facilitate the smooth transition into democracy back in Guinea through an electoral process. What remains to be agreed upon is how soon the election is going to take place. ECOWAS insisted that elections should take place by March, but you and I know that the logistics of putting election in place, particularly looking at the situation in Guinea and having to come up with a new constitution, is going to take a while. But I think what is interesting to note is that the military government is interested in taking power back to the people through a democratic process, but it's going to take some time. And I think that is what is presently being engaged and negotiated diplomatically between ECOWAS and the military government in Guinea.
And what are some of the challenges that Guinea is facing currently?
Well, I think a major challenge has been the negotiation process between the Guinean government and ECOWAS, because there seems not to have come to a common ground. Like I said earlier, ECOWAS won the election to come up in March, but the military government is insisting that that is too early. And I think that is where the impasse is now. But I believe there's going to be a diplomatic solution along the line.
All right, Wole Ojawale in Dakar, thank you for joining us. In Nigeria's Zamfara state, schools reopened on Monday after 4 months of closure. The local government in the northern state had ordered schools to be closed in September last year, following abduction of about 80 students at a secondary school that was part of a wave of kidnappings incidents. According to authorities, the reopening will see the resumption of learning in 115 schools. However, 85 learning institutions will remain closed until security improves. Criminal activities, including kidnappings, looting and ambush on villages, have been rampant in northwestern and central Nigeria. The United Nations says about 1,500 school children were seized in 20 kidnapping episodes, while 16 died.
It has fallen the academic of students backward. So we are pleading to parents to assist with the teachers and to help their pupils, send them back to school. School has really resumed. So we have to catch up with what we have lost in our back previous holiday we have got. It has really affected our academic calendar because we are trying to catch up with those that we have left aside. So we are trying to put something together so that we can continue with the academic calendar the way it is.
There is nobody known that this thing will happen. So we are praying for that and we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to protect them.
The Chinese embassy in South Sudan has donated school bags and stationery to support students affected by flooding in the East African country. 3 years of heavy rains led to flooding, destroying more than 200 schools across South Sudan, and the government is struggling to provide educational materials and infrastructure. And as CGTN's Patrick Oyet reports, China has also donated protective materials and equipment to help fight COVID-19 in the country.
The Chinese embassy in South Sudan says the donation of school bags comprising various learning supplies is from China Foundation for Poverty Alleviation. China is also building a number of schools in South Sudan. Beijing is also providing training for teachers as well as providing scholarships for South Sudanese students to study in China.
Education is of vital significance. As Chinese President Xi Jinping said, education determines the present and the future of mankind. A country will be strong if its education prospers. Education must be given priorities.
China has provided millions of textbooks to South Sudan's education ministry over the past 10 years. However, South Sudan's government says a lot of teaching materials were damaged by flooding, adding that it still needs more support for the country's education sector. 6 out of 10 states in South Sudan are affected by flooding. The UN ranks South Sudan among countries with the least developed educational infrastructure, and the literacy rate stands at 27%. South Sudan's government says it is working with countries like China to try and develop the education sector.
We are the same people in different countries because our culture, we have culture of hospitality, we have culture of telling the truth, and we have culture of helping each other. And that is why we have this very important scholastic materials.
And it wasn't just educational materials that were donated by China. It also gave 12,000 face masks, disinfectants, children's shoes, and 35 oxygen generators to help South Sudan fight COVID-19. Patrick Oyet, CGTN, Juba, South Sudan.
Africa is a continent of diversity, with varied climates and enchanting geography, and a people so distinct, but with a shared enduring spirit. We are at the heart of the continent to bring you the untold stories.
Let's have a look.
We celebrate Africa as it shapes its own destiny.
Tunis,
Cairo,
Juba,
Johannesburg,
Ethiopia, Tanzania.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Crude oil prices soared to their highest levels in over 7 years on Tuesday as geopolitical tension intensified in the Middle East. Brent crude futures rose 1.6% to $87.89 a barrel, while U.S. West Texas Intermediate futures jumped more than 2% to hit $85.56 during early morning deals. Both oil contracts notched their highest level since October 2014 after a subdued trading day on Monday as U.S. markets were closed for a public holiday. Prices have been rising from lows of $68 in the beginning of December as demand remained strong and perturbed by the rapid spread of the Omicron variant of COVID-19, even as global supply remained tight. The attack by Yemen's Houthi group on United Arab Emirates on Monday and the possibility of a retaliation by the latter has only added to the upside that experts said may continue. Now on to Tanzania, where data from the central bank shows that the national debt stood at $36 billion by the end of November last year, up from $5.3 billion year-on-year. External debt closed at just under $28 billion, an almost $216 million drop from October. The regulator attributed this to debt servicing payments outweighing disbursements during the month. However, debt was still higher by $4.1 billion compared with November of 2020. According to BOT, debt service payments in November amounted to just over $171 million. $114.2 million of that was in the form of principal repayments, while the rest represented interest. The government continued to dominate the external debt by borrower category, accounting for 73.4%, with debt to multilateral institutions accounting for the largest share at 44.1%, followed by commercial creditors at 34%. In Nigeria, the 650,000 barrels per day Dangote refinery, located in the commercial city of Lagos, is expected to commence operations this year. When it does, it will not only be the largest refinery in Africa, but also the world's biggest single facility. And as Deji Bademosi now reports from Lagos, Nigeria is pinning its hope on the refinery to end refined petrol imports and address its foreign exchange challenge.
The 650,000 barrels per day oil refinery is virtually the biggest construction project in Nigeria at the moment. The refinery has a petrochemical plant with a capacity of producing 900,000 tons of polyethylene and polypropylene granules per year. It's a big deal according to the governor of the Central Bank of Nigeria and would help the country conserve much needed foreign exchange.
Nigeria's annual consumption of polypropylene and polyethylene granules is less than 200,000 tons. What does that mean? By contribution in import content, again FX content, that is close to about 5% of our imports.
Nigeria imports virtually all the refined petrol it consumes due to inadequate domestic refining capacity, and the import takes about 30% of the country's foreign exchange. This is in addition to the billions of dollars the government spends in subsidizing the cost of petrol. The Dangote refinery is expected to save the country from all those costs.
We are burning about 100 billion naira every month, subsidizing petroleum products, PMS. It's just it can't support that. I can't put any reasoning behind this expenditure and denying state governments money that they need to develop their local economies.
If you save 5% of your imports, save another 30% in petroleum products, and then even fertilizer, that is almost maybe around that 2 to 3%, we are moving close to saving about 40% foreign exchange import for the country.
The Nigerian government is in talks with Dangote to acquire a 20% stake in the project. That is partly expected to guarantee crude supply to the refinery from the Nigerian National Petroleum Company. The government is also working to fix all of its 4 refineries and get them all running. If everything works out fine, Nigeria will soon be a major exporter of refined petroleum products. Deji Bademosi, CGTN, Lagos, Nigeria.
As various countries in Africa attempt to curb the spread of COVID-19 infections, some of those measures are having staggering effects on supply chains on the continent. In Uganda, for instance, it's reported that a build-up of petroleum trucks at the border with Kenya has caused a spike in gasoline prices by almost 50%. Uganda says mandatory COVID-19 tests at entry border points introduced at the beginning of the year have resulted in an enormous backlog, which is now holding the trucks for about 10 days in a queue. Previously, Uganda had allowed drivers entry with negative COVID results for tests taken elsewhere. Gasoline prices in the capital, Kampala, have jumped to as much as 6,630 shillings, about $1.88 per litre, and that's up from about 4,480 shillings. Meanwhile, in Kenya, the shilling continues to feel the pressure as the dollar strengthens. Investors surveyed say they anticipate the country's central bank to increase the interest rate. In forex trade, Kenya's currency fell to 113.6 shillings against the dollar on Monday. It was the weakest on record. In a bid to strengthen the shilling, the central bank offered 10 billion shillings. That's almost $90 million of 7-day term auction deposits on Monday. However, currency experts say the shilling may continue to feel the heat due to reduced inflows from exports, the markets continuing to bet on the US dollar gaining, as well as elevated global oil prices. Economists say they expect a rate hike in Kenya as early as the end of the quarter. South Africa's new motor vehicle sales sector has rebounded from its COVID-19 market-induced collapse in 2020. It's now expected to grow by 8% in 2022, as Angelo Coppola now reports from Johannesburg.
The Automotive Business Council says it's fairly confident of reaching that projected 8% growth rate. But it's got to convince people to stop buying second-hand cars and buy new cars instead. And then there's the interest rate environment.
For South Africans, particularly your blue-collar workers, buying a vehicle in the country is the second biggest investment for them. Interest rates play a very critical role because they use their disposable income in order for them to be able to buy those brand new vehicles.
In 2020, the export of vehicles and automotive components was valued at $11 billion, or about 13.9% of South Africa's total exports.
So there's certainly prospect for what I would call recovery, ongoing recovery, if you look at the way vehicle sales have performed over the COVID period. I think the greater challenge is from an import perspective. You have supply chain constraints, and you have constant, this is a permanent feature of the South African landscape, currency volatility.
Economists aren't convinced that the motor vehicle sector will reach that growth rate.
They are going to get growth, but it'll be closer to 5% rather than 8%. I'll tell you why. The South African economy is only forecast to grow 2% or below. And under those circumstances, it's difficult to see how we get to 5% growth in the motor vehicle industry even. But 8% particularly will be very, very difficult.
The export market is a major part of the South African motor vehicle market, accounting for 64% of total production.
We need to be able to make sure that our supply chain challenges that we've had, particularly in 2021 and also in 2020, are fixed and managed very systematically and very quickly.
The African Continental Free Trade Area is a potential market for South African manufactured vehicles, but there's scope to do things differently.
It's this clustering component where you have supported and related industries clustering around each other that builds this manufacturing base. And that's where the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, I think, has the greatest prospect.
There's no question that the sector is important. The manufacturing component employs around 110,000 people, while it's
As I said, I wanted to change the system of play because we were beginning to suffer a bit against Ghana. They were very, very strong individually, and inevitably, we let in the second goal, which changed the game a bit. So we had to try and come from that. So we stuck with the same system we had from the start. We came back, and then we closed in on them during the last 5 minutes, so as to be more compact and more powerful defensively.
We did not start the match as expected. The game did not go well from the beginning. We let in an early goal and then we got the red card, which completely changed the match. We tried to come back from that and win, and my boys did everything they could. But I have to congratulate Comoros. They deserved this victory.
Elsewhere, Senegal was held to a goalless draw against Malawi at the Stade Omnisport de Bafoussam in Cameroon. The draw saw the Teranga Lions finish top of Group Zimbabwe. The Teranga Lions will face a third-placed side from Group A, C or D in the last 16 on January 25th. Elsewhere, Rwandan referee Salima Mukansanga has become the first woman to officiate